Hello, and hey, Ernest. You got a turtle on your nose, man. Welcome to Best of the Rest. My name is Chris Logan, and I am joined, as always, by my co-host and aspiring camp counselor, Andrew Williams. How are we doing today, Andrew?
I'm doing all right. How are you, Chris?
That's good. That's good. I'm doing well. I'm feeling great. I'm ready to talk some more summer camp. That is our theme for the month of August, the last month of summer. Kids are getting ready to go back to school. We're talking about the classic movie trope of a summer camp. We touched on it last week, but it's a thing I've seen in movies my entire life. It seemed to really be popular in the 80s, movies about summer camps. I've never been to one. I'm beginning to question if they exist. As we make our way through these movies, I'm just starting to wonder if places like this ever actually existed. We kicked it off last week with Friday the 13th, the original Friday the 13th. And in our Discord server, which you can join, there's a link in the show notes. Hop on in there. We did have someone write in with their positive thoughts about Friday the 13th. We had already recorded the episode, so we're going to get into it right here at the top of the episode. This comes from Garoffles, who says, They wrote that out. Friday the 13th is a classic horror slasher film. In many ways, I've known more about the film without watching it. I've seen documentaries on production, heard people talk about it endlessly, and of course, I know the symbols within the franchise. I didn't watch the movie until the most recent October 13th, 2023, which landed on a Friday. Because it's so rare, I thought I'd celebrate the date. I had no idea until watching the movie that Kevin Bacon was in this. Wild. Have to give the Mark Strong Golden Sphere, they say, to Betsy Palmer. Like Andrew, I like a good villain, and her performance is a standout. Plus, I still vividly remember the movie's special effects showing her comeuppance. It is incredible to me, as a first-time viewer to the series, how long it builds to get to the iconic Jason with his hockey mask. It's like 2.5 or 3.5 movies, I can't remember exactly, but it is at least the third or fourth movie and during the third act. Either way, great film series, and honestly, a great way to start it all off. I'm going to go strip naked and go night swimming just because now, hopefully no killers are around. Okay, well that happens later in the series, but fantastic. I mean, obviously he wrote this in without having heard our episode, but agreeing with our Mark Strong pick with Betsy Palmer, giving her the Mark Strong Award, as we know, which is represented by a golden sphere that represents Mark Strong's head. Andrew, sometimes I think our podcast doesn't have a lot of lore and people can jump in at any time, but sometimes I read a comment like that. I'm like, well, that probably doesn't make sense to anyone if this is their first episode.
Yeah, I suppose. There's a little bit of, it's that thing where, like, you don't realize what you know, like, because you've been through it. Like, I'll be at, like, what if I'm training somebody at work? I'll mention something and they're like, oh, what is that? And I forget that this thing that is innately in my brain isn't in somebody else's. And so, yeah, people may not know what the Golden Orb is.
You don't know every line from the 1990 film Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles? I can't casually drop that in conversation and you pick up on it? Going to LaGuardia, right?
Savages in this town, man.
No, I mean, I think they nailed it. I mean, I think they're pretty much in line with a lot of things that we went over during that episode. And there was a follow-up in the Discord by Mike Lynch who says, I've only seen bits and pieces, referring to Friday the 13th, but my favorite part by far is when Kevin Bacon walks in with his short shorts on, and my sister told her daughter, look, you can see Kevin's bacon. That is pretty good.
So,
line.
Yes, Mike, you've definitely seen some bits there, haven't you?
Hey, bacon bits, if you will. But that was last week. We're done with Friday the 13th. We are moving on. The next entry for the month in our summer camp theme, because every week we take a second look at a movie that was poorly received upon release and challenge ourselves to only talk about the things we like and what the movie does well. Of course, it is summer camp month. And this week we are talking the 1987 film Ernest Goes to Camp. Our second time talking about an Ernest film. Probably won't be our last. But Andrew, what is your history with this movie? I mean, we got to talk. We covered Ernest Saves Christmas. We've talked about the character and our history of the character a lot. But do you have any specific memories of watching Ernest Goes to Camp for the first time, or does it all kind of blend together with the other Ernest movies?
No, like there's definitely like Ernest Saves Christmas. You've got like the Christmas setting, so like there's at least some Ernest driving the Christmas sleigh and things, or Santa sleigh and things like that. And Ernest Scared Stupid, like that movie swings so unbelievably hard for what it's doing. And those things just live in my head. All the other Ernest stuff largely just kind of blends together. And so if you asked me what the plot of Ernest Goes to Camp was before watching it, I would have been like, I bet Ernest is at a camp. And that would have probably been the end of it. So no real. I may very well have watched it as a kid. Like, this is definitely something I could see my parents being like, oh, this is a fine movie that we could rent that the kids can watch and you don't have to worry about it. But no real specific memories of Ernest Goes to Camp at all beyond knowing that it existed.
I mean, Ernest movies really don't need taglines, right? Ernest Goes to Camp. You know what you're getting.
Yeah.
Slam dunk Ernest. I can guess what he's doing in that movie. Ernest Goes to Africa. Probably aged extremely well, but I know what happens in that movie, right? Ernest in the Army. I mean, really, Ernest Scared Stupid is one of the more ambiguous titles. But I know this is something we discussed last time we talked about Ernest, but I still, reading through these titles, have a hard time wrapping my head around it because, like, reality isn't lining up with what I remember.
Right.
I remember Ernest Goes to Camp. I remember watching this with my older brother. We rented it, and I remember this movie. In my head, I think I could probably tell you this was the first Ernest movie. But other than that, I remember Ernest Scared Stupid the most, and it's definitely my favorite at the time. I haven't watched it in a long time, but it's probably still my favorite. I got a feeling we're going to get there eventually in this podcast. But I would guess that's the second Ernest movie because, like, the production value is pretty good. I mean, the trolls in that movie are like, they live in my head rent-free, and it's a genuinely fun and unique design. I remember Ernest Saves Christmas. I would have guessed that's the third movie. And then all those other movies I was rattling off, Ernest Goes to School, Ernest Rides Again, those were all, like, in my brain. I never watched them. I saw them on the Blockbuster shelf. They were made years later. They were straight to video, whatever. But in reality, you have Ernest Goes to Camp in 87, Ernest Saves Christmas in 88, Ernest Goes to Jail in 1990, which, again, that was one of those, like, random, I'm never watching this type Ernest movies. And then Ernest Scared Stupid comes after that in 1991. Wild. Not how my childhood brain remembers it at all. But no. The ones I did watch, mainly those big three I mentioned, kind of blend together. I watched them all about the same time period in my life, but I definitely remember watching Ernest Goes to Camp. I don't think I watched it a ton because this was certainly the first time I watched this movie in 25 years. I would have to guess, which, gosh, golly, I feel old saying that. But certain scenes really, I didn't remember the movie as a whole, but there's certainly certain scenes and gags that were still in my brain that were fun to go back to, and we're going to be talking all about it. The positives, of course. This is a hashtag positivity podcast. We're here to celebrate the good stuff, but first, let's set the stage a little bit here. This film was released May 22nd of 1987. It was made on a budget of just $3.5 million, and at the box office, it brings in $23.5 million. Honestly, pretty big success when you consider that budget. And this movie had a great shelf life on home video. Critically, a little hard to gauge. Rotten Tomatoes says it has a 62%. That is based on 8 reviews that are all retrospective. So you got small sample size, you got nostalgia reviews, which seem to be a little bit different than at time of release reviews. The audience score, which of course is always retrospective reviews, only has 51%, which I was kind of surprised by. I thought more people would remember this movie fondly from their childhood. But I had to do my due diligence. I had to hop on one of my favorite websites I've promoted many times, mrqe.com, movie review query engine, because I wanted to get some of that sweet vintage reviews. What were critics saying at the time of its release? So I searched up Ernest Goes to Camp. The very first review is a historic review from the New York Times. I click on the link. It asked me to subscribe, which I will not do. So I don't know. I don't have any excerpts to read. People seemed like it was fine in 1987. I did find another review from the Washington Post. It's from May 23rd, 1987. It's kind of a down-the-middle review. It says the mental age of the film is about 13. It says there's worse movies out there. It's not as slapped together as you might think, and there's a little bit of heart here. So kind of a good review, but about what you would expect. Andrew, what do you think of the legacy of this movie? Do you think there's a lot of people holding it in high regards, or have most people forgotten about this film as they've grown up?
It's an interesting question. I looked at Metacritic real quick to see if I could get kind of another idea, and it's got it at a 24 out of 100.
Wow.
The Washington Post review is at a 50. I believe it's the one you're talking about. It looks like these are historic ones from the time. New York Times has it as a 3 out of 10. Miami Herald had it as like a 1 out of 4. TV Guide magazine had it as a 1 out of 5, and the Chicago Tribune had it as like a 12 out of 100, whatever that is. So even the reviews at the time largely were all pretty much dismissing it as probably a super juvenile not movie with not a lot of substance. And I'm not going to say that's wrong, but also I guess you can't really say it's an Ernest movie. What did you expect? Because this is the first one. Like,
we did a deep dive on Ernest last time we talked about him, but this character comes from TV commercials, like very popular TV commercials. So people knew the character, but it's a commercial character moving to a movie. I mean, I think you compared it to like if Flo from Progressive starred in a movie suddenly, like people would be ready to hate it. I mean, who's given that the benefit of the doubt?
Even then, it's like, can you take that character and extend it to full length? So with Ernest, it's easy because you can basically make any plot you want and just stick Ernest in it, like that, and that's largely what happens. There's several of these movies where Ernest is like Ernest Saves Christmas. I think we kind of talked about it, that like Ernest is not very important to that story. He's actually kind of completely unneeded, really, as far as the events of that movie go. There's this driving plot that's beyond him. Now, with this one, we'll talk about it more, but he's a little bit more weaved into the plot, only really because he works at this camp, though. Like, with Ernest, you really can transplant him and put him anywhere, as evidenced by the fact that that's what they did with him for the 15 years they were making Ernest movies.
Yeah, he can have any job,
basketball.
He can be any part of the country. Yeah.
He can do anything. He can go to jail. He can go back to school. He can work at a camp. He can play basketball with Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Like, he can literally do whatever he wants. But I think, obviously, this one was decently successful. I mean, it was very successful. I mean, $23 million off a $3.5 million budget is pretty nuts. But I'm guessing home video had a huge piece of that legacy. But yeah, I don't really hear people talking about Ernest movies much at all in general, but if I do hear them talking about it, it's almost always exclusively Ernest Scared Stupid, probably followed by Ernest Saves Christmas. So like I don't know what like modern legacy Ernest Goes to Camp even has. Like you can't find this movie really. I don't know that there's any in-print version of this movie out there. We were kind of talking about that in the lead up to this, kind of like, oh, how do we actually watch this? And like, you can get it relatively cheap, but it's all secondhand mostly. Like it's almost all used. There's almost no modern version of it in print. And there's some people that have given a variety of reasons for that, and we can talk about that a little bit more later in the show.
We'll get into it.
It's kind of tough to find it. And so I think that definitely now at least contributes to that legacy of like, you're even kind of stopping people from being like, oh, Ernest Goes to Camp. I remember that as a kid, because there's really no way to get it. So a weird situation.
This movie, like virtually every Ernest project, is written and directed by John R. Cherry III. This particular film does have a co-writing credit by Coke Sams, who is essentially someone just from the John R. Cherry camp. All of his credits are also just various Ernest projects, basically. So, without a doubt, John R. Cherry, the driving creative force behind this film, along with, of course, Jim Varney. But what can you say about John R. Cherry? Like, you can't talk about this man without talking about Ernest. You can't talk about Ernest films without talking about Jim Varney. It's a very specific brand of comedy. And attempt to launch this character he created into a greater stratosphere. And then you've got like the spin-off characters that are attempted in like every Ernest movie, which we'll talk about when we get to cast. But John R. Cherry's basically entire career is producing these films and this character. And honestly, that's very cool. I mean, what a cool career to have. Like this very specific corner of show business. You've got one hit, one character, and there's really not like, he did some other stuff, but you get the feeling that he was never like ashamed or embarrassed of Ernest or like wanted to move on to other things. Like he clearly enjoyed this, had a passion for it. He knew this was his cash cow and put everything he had into it until he passed away a few years ago. So R.A.P. John R. Cherry, but genuinely, I think a pretty cool career.
Yeah, I mean, he's the executive vice president and was the co-namesake of the Nashville-based Cardin and Cherry advertising agency. And that's where Ernest was developed. And that's always been kind of the interesting thing for me is like, I guess my brain would have assumed that Ernest was like a Jim Varney creation. Like that.
Yeah, like something he did on stage or something.
Like because he was a stand-up comic earlier in his career. And I would have assumed that Ernest is something that like he workshopped and figured out on stage and then was like, oh, let's turn this into a character.
It
and
feels
I'm sure
like
Jim
his
Varney,
Ace Ventura or Pee Wee
bit.
Herman type thing.
Before either, really. Like
right, but something that actor
something like
created, crafted, yeah.
And so when you kind of find out that, no, that's not really the case, it's always interesting. Now, I'm sure Jim Varney had some input into the character. I can't imagine that he didn't, playing the character like he did and having it being such a physical performance.
The denim vest was actually my contribution to the character.
The denim vest was the very important part. But, like, it's always weird to me, the fear that, like, John Cherry, like, created that character at the ad agency as, like, a selling, like, you know, it was an ad. It was meant to be commercials, and built this whole lore, built this whole gimmick, like the idea of like talking to Vern off screen, like all of that stuff comes from John Cherry, and then Jim Varney obviously brings it to life in a way that is still very much remembered and very iconic. But anyway, yeah, like that just always wild to me that Jim Varney didn't come up with this character himself. But yeah, I mean, like I said, he did basically all the Ernest movies. Did a couple of other things afterwards when Jim Varney's health was declining. Did a couple of other things, but you know, he ran with Ernest as long as he could, and it went for a while. So I think he directs literally all of them except maybe Ernest Goes to School. So even after they stop being like theatrical releases and they start being
straight to video
limited release, he's still involved. Actually, Ernest Goes to School, I just checked, is actually the only one that is directed by Coke Sam's. So Coke Sam's actually comes in and co-writes that with someone else and directs it at that point. It actually looks like it might be the only one that John R. Cherry doesn't have a lot to do with. Interestingly enough, and that might have been because that was the first one not in theaters. He may have been like, all right, I'll let the other guys handle this one. But yeah, that's the one that, so even though it's not directed by John Cherry, it's still directed by Coke Sam's, who's been involved with many of these movies and have been involved with the characters. So but yeah, a really interesting career, and he did pass away in 2022. I'm sure we talked about that on Ernest Saves Christmas, but yeah, what an interesting career to have.
Andrew, I think it's time that we jump into this film, talk about all the positives, everything we like, everything that works in Ernest Goes to Camp. Are you ready?
Yes.
Ernest P. Worrell works as a handyman for the summer camp Kikiki, but aspires to be a camp counselor. He finally gets his chance when a group of kids attend camp from a juvenile detention center as part of a second chance program. Ernest is in charge of the new batch of kids who have trouble fitting in with the camp regulars. But when an evil businessman named Sherman Crater tries to force Chief St. Cloud to sell the campgrounds, all of Camp Kikiki must band together to help save the summer camp. Nice, simple, straightforward story, Andrew. It almost feels like, I don't know if this is like a positive or just kind of plain fact, but it feels like this movie was just written about the summer camp, and then like Ernest is plugged in as this character. Like, it doesn't feel built around Ernest. It feels like a pretty standard summer camp story you might see from an 80s film, and hey, this guy, let's make it Ernest, you know what I mean? You know what I mean?
Know what I mean? No, was that on purpose?
It was not.
Well, no, and it's kind of what we talked about with like Ernest Saves Christmas. Like Ernest Saves Christmas is not a movie that, here's a story that's simply about Santa Claus retiring and needing to find someone else to take on the mantle, and Ernest is just there. Like and this is kind of similar. Like I said, he's woven in simply because he's basically the maintenance man at this summer camp. That's always wanted to be a camp counselor because it's what we all dream of, really.
Sure,
but
yeah.
it is wild that, like, again, it's kind of like and that may have just been John Cherry's idea for the character. Like, build a story that Ernest is a part of versus trying to just make it an Ernest thing in that sense. And I feel like Ernest Scared Stupid is a little bit different, where like I feel like he's much more prominent in that, but I haven't rewatched Ernest Scared Stupid in a long time, so I might be remembering that wrong.
I'm sure we'll get there,
one day.
Andrew.
One day.
Andrew, let's talk about the cast of this film, as we always do, and we're going to start with the high point: best casting, best performance in the movie, because every episode we recognize one person who goes so far above and beyond the call of duty that they actually elevate the quality of the entire film with their performance, and we recognize that person by giving them the Mark Strong Award. So, Andrew, kick us off. Who gets your Mark Strong Award for Ernest Goes to Camp?
I got to go straight to the top. It's Jim Varney as Ernest P. Worrell. You
have to.
Like, he's the star of the movie. Like, the plot is kind of, he's kind of a little bit unnecessary to the plot, but he's still the driving force of this movie.
Totally.
The comedy that he's putting out there is still the top of the film. Like, everything hinges on Jim Varney's performance as Ernest. And I'm pretty sure we said the exact same thing for Ernest Saves Christmas. But,
yes. I mean, despite what I was just saying about it doesn't feel like it's built around Ernest plot-wise, it feels like they might have just dropped this character into an existing story. He's still obviously the focus. It's obviously a vehicle for his antics. Which are good, which I like.
Yeah, and they're good. They're, it's Ernest largely doesn't change from movie to movie. Ernest is well-meaning, but pretty dim-witted. He's pretty clumsy. He has no real sense of boundaries or self-awareness. But there's this endearing heart to the character. Like, throughout this movie, you get lots of moments where, like, there's vulnerabilities with Ernest. There's moments where Ernest is genuinely kind of sad at the things that unfold.
He sings a ballad in this movie, which I did not have on my bingo card.
And then, like, when the time comes that he needs to stand up and save the camp, like, he gets stoic and he's like, they're not going to take this camp. And it's an interesting amount of range for the character. I guess such as it is, I guess. But Jim Varney has given it his all. He takes it seriously. He never wavers. And in that regard, I don't think there's anywhere else you can go except Jim Varney as the Mark Strong.
Yeah, obviously agreeing. I couldn't imagine anybody giving it to anyone else in any of these movies, which sounds like an insult to other actors in the movie, which is not the case. We'll talk about them. We'll give them their flowers. Right. But, like, the reason you watch an Ernest movie is for Jim Varney's performance. I think as we were recording the last Ernest movie we talked about, Ernest Saves Christmas, I had the epiphany, like, so much of what Jim Carrey would become known for in 94, 7 years after this movie, you can see in these Ernest films. Like, the over-the-top character, he's a wacky character in an otherwise normal world. The rubber face in particular, like, so many shots in an Ernest movie are just a close-up of Jim Varney's face, so you can see him contort it in a funny way. I mean, literally one of his catchphrases is, "Ew," and his bottom jaw just jiggles back and forth. The voices, the character he dresses up as, his laugh and his eyebrows. I mean, he's a living cartoon character.
He is.
Like I said, exactly what Jim Carrey would do years later. And I have searched for this. I did it again just to see if I could find anything. Like, I want to hear Jim Carrey talk about Jim Varney. And I don't think it's going to be like, I ripped him off or was inspired by him. Jim Carrey was on stage by this time. He had a lot of this stuff he had become known for at this time, but I feel like he's got to appreciate what Jim Varney was doing. I mean, Ernest walked, so Jim Carrey could alrighty then. I think it might have been the exact line I said last time. But I just can't help but like see that parallel. But that's all to say that the reason you watch an Ernest movie is for Ernest, who is just so likable. And it's so weird because it's
hard to root. You can't root against Ernest. You just can't. Like, yes. He's like, no matter what he's doing, he is like the eternal underdog. He is always trying to do the right thing, even if it's not necessarily going to go the way he wants.
Jim Varney is born in 1949. This is 1987. He's 38, right?
Jesus.
He's nearly a 40-year-old man. And in some of the later Ernest movies, he'll be in his 40s. And I say that just because it's such an odd... I mean, this guy is like a hero to children, right? I loved Ernest a lot as a kid. I think you and I maybe a little on the younger side. Like, we grew up with Ernest, but like my brother is 4 years older than me, can actually remember these movies actually coming out.
Yeah, like this movie comes out like 6 weeks before or 2 months before I'm born.
Yeah, so we're seeing it later on home video.
We're catching the home video,
or
we're catching the end of Ernest basically as we're kids.
But there's a whole generation that looks at this 40-year-old man in a very standard like gray t-shirt and blue denim vest and is like, that's my guy. That's my, my favorite character. Like, it's such a weird thing because he's not, I don't know. It's a strange, not who I'd expect to be like an icon to children, but something about it works, and you've got to attribute that something to Jim Varney, just putting it all together, and John Archerry. I guess we shouldn't undercut him. I mean, he's writing the character and developing the character, but it's performed by Jim Varney. Got to give him his flowers and bless him for dedicating the majority of his career to this character. He obviously does other things. Beverly Hillbillies is a movie we talked about last time. We talked about Ernest, and of course he does Slink in the first 2 Toy Story movies before he passes away. So obviously R.I.P. to Jim Varney, but this guy's great. I love it.
I would just be curious to hear what other comedians think about Jim Varney. Just because I feel like it's like, what does Jim Carrey think about Jim Varney? Like, I would just be curious to ask him that question. And just generally, like I said, what is his legacy, generally speaking? Because he, unlike a lot of other comedians who went on to do like a wide variety of things, like he kind of is Ernest, and no offense to the man, that's largely it. Like, there's not a whole lot to it beyond Ernest. And I would still be curious, like, what his legacy is ultimately, and what other comedians kind of think of him. And so,
I mean, there's a famous play based on the life of Jim Varney, The Importance of Being Ernest.
I hate you. I hate you.
To give you an idea of what his legacy is. But no, I agree. Like, obviously being a kid, loving this character makes a lot of sense, but like, there's people from our generation or Gen X that are now in the entertainment industry that had to have been influenced by Ernest, but it's not something I've ever seen talked about. And I feel like there could be probably a pretty good documentary about this character going from commercials to successful television. I mean, it's a pretty unique story, but I haven't seen that big retrospective or even like interviews, but I would love to hear, more about it. Maybe it does exist and someone can like recommend it. Like, hey guys, look at this article or whatever. So if you're aware of it, let us know. I would love to check it out. But Andrew, there are other people in this movie that we need to talk about. Let's just jump to who ultimately is our main villain. John Vernon plays Sherman Crater, the bad guy, the evil, I don't know what you call him, land real estate guy. He just wants to buy more land, and this campground is in the way. He wants to buy it and demolish it, which makes him the evil capitalist, which, I love a good evil capitalist villain. They never say he's from Texas, but I always get the impression that these guys are from Texas. You see him shooting a gun. He's
That's all it takes to be from Texas.
That's all it takes. I don't know. So anything with like an oil tycoon or a real estate developer, they usually have like a big cowboy hat. He doesn't in this one, but like you see him in boots. You see him like with the longhorn horns at the front of their car. Like I feel like that's a very specific trope. But at any rate, this guy is really evil. He tries to murder people. I mean, to get his way. Like he is a real cutthroat. It just played by John Vernon, who's just very good at being despicable. He looks like a bad guy. He made a very successful career as a character actor at doing that pretty often. He's got a face for it. I'll say that.
Yeah, I mean, probably most notably known by many as Dean Wormer in Animal House. That's probably like his most famous role.
Animal House.
Double secret probation, that whole thing, that was all him. He was also the mayor in the first Dirty Harry movie that kind of chastises Dirty Harry throughout the movie, just kind of acts as the administrative foil to Dirty Harry's reckless police work. He was also in The Outlaw Josie Wales, another one of Clint Eastwood's westerns. And basically, like, the minute he does Animal House, he largely spends the rest of his career just playing a version of that character. Like, this character here is largely just Dean Wormer, but the head of a mining company instead. Yeah, their whole thing is they want to mine this mineral that's worth millions, but they don't just call it gold. They have to call it something else. They call it something weird. But yeah, I mean, he's a bad dude. He is 100% bad. He's a bad guy in, I think, almost everything I've ever watched him in. And he's even in an Alfred Hitchcock movie called Topaz. He's been everywhere. He's done everything, and here he's just leaning into basically all of his classic tropes. He's being a bad guy. He's being really, really evil, being really mean to people for no reason. And when he doesn't get his way, resorts to some violent ways. It's what he does, and he's good at it. He's very good at it. Also, big rest in peace to John Vernon. He passed away in 2005, but yeah, his legacy's pretty intact.
Fun fact, he's got a couple kids in the business, and Kate Vernon, looking at their credits, they're in the sci-fi version of Battlestar Galactica and various other parts. Successful career acting. Nan Vernon, and this is just straight from the top of their Wikipedia, the very first line. Nan Vernon is a Canadian singer. She is notable for providing the in-credit music of both Rob Zombie's Halloween films.
Alum of the show.
Alum of the show. So specific. Such a very specific credit.
Yeah.
But cool. It goes on to say that they're part of a singer-songwriter trend of women nurturing folk music's rebirth, which sounds very cool. So
looks like she did a cover. Looks like she did a cover of Mr. Sandman for the first Rob Zombie Halloween movie, and then she did a cover of Love Hurts for the Halloween 2 soundtrack. The most notably performed by Nazareth, but originally done by the Everly Brothers. So fun.
I will be adding both of those to some kind of playlist. That sounds like a lot of fun.
Not the spooky one, I'm guessing.
I don't know. We'll see. I'll see what the vibes are. It might be my deep undercover covers playlist, or maybe a Halloween mix. Victoria Racimo plays Nurse St. Cloud. Now, this is in a different movie would be the love interest of Ernest, but they don't quite go that route. But she is the level-headed character. The it's weird. You would think this would be like a camp. There we see the camp leader, we see other camp counselors, but she seems like the most. I think level-headed is maybe the right one. She has obviously a direct connection with the owner of the campground, which is her grandfather, Chief St. Cloud. But she's the nurse. She's very kind. She's kind to Ernest. She's looking out for everybody's best interest. At the end of the movie, when the kids are going to fight back, she's like, this is crazy. You'll get yourself hurt. She's like the voice of reason, I think maybe is the term I was looking for. But it's such a... These roles are so thankless because she is like playing this character super straightforward, to play off of Jim Varney's wackiness. And everyone's going to, praise Jim Varney for, we getting the Mark Strong Award, hands down. But you have to have these straight men roles around him. Straight women, straight people roles, whatever the correct term for that is. But you need actors like this playing it serious. And she's very good at it. I don't see a lot of other credits. I don't really know much about her career, but I think she's great here.
Looks like a lot of television stuff, bit parts here and there, all throughout the kind of 80s, 70s, 80s, and 90s. Some of the stuff I see here, she was on the Mod Squad, she was on Kung Fu, the original Kung Fu, Prophecy, Brave New World, The Mountain Men, even Dr. Quinn Medicine Woman, a couple of episodes. So, even an episode of Doogie Howser, MD. So, just like I said, kind of like a veteran of the television guest star landscape. But yeah, here she gets, she's obviously the granddaughter of our Chief St. Cloud, who owns all of this land, kind of being the big motivation there. And she obviously hasn't invested in this kind of camp and seeing that it survives. But yeah, like I said, she has to play off Jim Varney, and that's got to be tough. She's the one that's kind of sticking up for Ernest, though. There's several points in the movie where Ernest is clearly being taken advantage of. People are being kind of cruel to him, and she's the one that kind of points out to some of these kids that, hey, Ernest is maybe the only person who actually cares in this whole place. And she's on his side. But like you said, any other movie, she'd be the love interest, but that's just not what they do with Ernest. It's just not his bag, man.
All right, Andrew. We got to talk about Iron Eyes Cody, who plays Chief St. Cloud. Iron Eyes Cody, that's what they're credited as. So here's the deal with this gentleman. He's perhaps most known in pop culture zeitgeist for being the, quote, crying Indian from the PSA. This came up, I think, in our Wayne's World 2 episode because they reference it there.
Yep.
And that's a PSA paid for by basically big soda companies and other can manufacturers to make us feel guilty about recycling when they are the ones that are contributing. It's total green. Like, the fact that everything is bad about this PSA. All right. I don't feel bad about getting mocked to death for 30 years. But he plays he's called the Crying Indian. I know we like the term Native American here, but just trying to be accurate to, like, the conversation here, okay? And he has an entire career, basically as a character actor, playing Native American characters. I mean, he's doing it here in this Ernest movie. Commercials, PSAs, television shows, movies. It's what this guy does. However, he is not a Native American. He is of Sicilian descent. I think he had a half-sister that kind of blew the whole lid on this thing. Came out in the news and was like, he's not even Native American. What are you guys doing? Yeah. But as far as I can tell, he never addressed the controversy. He was always credited as some variation of Iron Eyes Cody, Chief Iron Eyes. Obviously a very Native American sounding name, until he died in 1999. Now, I don't necessarily want to like demonize this guy too much because I don't know his story. I don't know how malicious he was doing this. I don't know if he was. I don't know. The conversation about representation wasn't as big then as it is now, which doesn't make anything okay. But I mean, did he believe he was of Native American descent? Did he find out later that he wasn't and was too go back? I don't know this guy's story. That being said, I'm not gonna praise him for what he did either. But I think it's one of those things where it's a little too easy to judge him through today. And I'm speaking just for myself because Andrew has his own thoughts. Don't worry. It would be too easy to demonize him too much through today's lens and say he did this all as a nefarious act. That might be the case. I really don't know. It's a weird situation. It was never really discussed head on. He never talked about it. There's not that Barbara Walters interview where she digs into it. I don't know the man's whole story. I've got more to say about the film itself and how it fits in there, but Andrew, go ahead.
He knew what he was doing. He 100% knew what he was doing. I think it's, to borrow a wrestling term, I think he worked himself into a shoot. I think because you can read about his early life and like what it was. Like he was born to parents in Louisiana, two parents that were descended from people from Italy. Like that's known. Obviously, I mean, this man was born in 1904. So he was he's pretty. I mean, he's 83 by the time this movie comes out. But so he knew what he was doing, and I think he obviously in the 20s, Native Americans appeared in a great many films. Very often not played by Native American people. There are some pretty troubling depictions of them throughout the times, throughout the years. I think he simply
just saw an opportunity and dedicated his life to this ruse.
Because then, he would be, essentially. And, I'm not going to say that, I think that's wrong. I think it's very wrong.
Yeah.
He, I think, benefited immensely from the fact that, especially at the time, who's going to question it? Like, there's not really people that are going to be like, oh, please provide your documentation that you are who you say you are, that these things are true. And so he apparently would frequently change where he was born. He would change the tribes. It would shift around a lot. And I think he just kind of got away with it. And to the point that when maybe you would have started questioning it, it was so established by that point that no one really did question it. Like, it's just, he's been, he's said this for 30 years. Why would you make that up? And it is his half-sister in 96, actually, before he dies, that, like, says, you guys know this is nonsense, right? And everyone was like, what? It didn't really gain a lot of traction. But then after he died, then it was very clearly found and stated and shown that his parents were Italian descendants and not Native American at all.
What's wild to me is that he dresses like this in his everyday life.
Yeah,
at some point,
like
it takes over his life. And so, worked himself into a shoot, I think, is a pretty good term. I don't know. I'm not saying this guy deserves the benefit of the doubt. I don't want to go on record saying I'll be defending this guy. I just don't demonize him too. Like, what's going on there? I think that's beyond. I wouldn't be surprised to see that's beyond just a grift. If he's dressing like maybe it's not a misconception. Maybe it is. He's done it so long. He's confused himself. Maybe there's a mental thing going on there. Like mental. I don't know. It's a kind of fascinating situation. Doesn't make it okay. It's wrong. I will unequivocally agree with you on that. A larger point I want to make here is that, as we said at the beginning of the episode, this movie is now very hard to find. The podcast How Did This Get Made, which is a podcast about bad movies, if you will, good podcast, covered this movie, and I see a lot of Reddit posts about them covering it and people wanting to watch the movie. And like within the past calendar year, I'm pretty sure I saw a post that was like, hey, it's on Hulu. You can watch Ernest Goes to Camp on Hulu. It's not there now. I looked on Hulu. So it was streaming rather recently. Hulu is a Disney company. But there's another Reddit post, and you linked it to me, Andrew. So like the source on this is literally just a Redditor, which is just
trust me, bro. Trust me. Like it could be
exactly.
Like,
and what they're saying is the casting of Iron Eyes Cody is why this is hard to find, and Disney is burying it because they don't want that controversy, which I don't really buy.
Yeah,
because this movie has had a re-release, has had a Blu-ray release, and has been streaming on Hulu rather recently. So like, it's out there. They're putting it out there for one, and two, I can watch Kevin Spacey movies. I could find Roman Polanski movies. Like, there's much on the grand scale of morality. There's worse things that have not buried entire film productions. I'm not buying that's why it's hard to find, but I don't know. I don't know why it's hard to find. I think eventually we'll get a re-release of some kind.
I'm sure we will. I'm sure the 4K Ernest set is coming eventually, and it'll be, hopefully it's all 9 films in one neat package.
That would be insane.
It would absolutely be. It would be nonsense.
I would probably buy it on the sale, though.
I definitely would. It is always weird that you think about that, though, when movies just kind of like disappear. And like, I kind of got rid of a lot of physical media when I started moving around the country, but I've slowly kind of been acquiring it because I realized I like stuff. But it's a weird thing when you start digging into movies that are hard to find. Like, one that's kind of difficult to find physically is 28 Weeks Later. Like, 28 days later, you can get everywhere. But 28 weeks, apparently, largely gone out of print. Now, in most cases, out of print does not inherently mean expensive, because a movie like 28 Weeks Later was very widely circulated when it was available. So there's, hundreds of thousands, if not millions of copies of that movie available. So even if someone throws it on eBay, or even if you find it in a store, it's probably not going to go for very much. Maybe just what it retailed for new. Other movies disappear, and it was a limited run, and it's almost impossible to find. Sometimes it's books. It happens with books. There's an author I really like, Grady Hendrix. I've mentioned him a few times. He had 2 very early books that he put out. Both are out of print, and go for hundreds, if not people asking for thousands for them. Now, they never get thousands because the books aren't freaking worth that, but it happens a lot. Now, Ernest Goes to Camp is definitely more in the former than the latter. You can find copies of Ernest Goes to Camp for relatively cheap, especially if you're going the DVD route. There are people who try to charge a lot for it. They will not succeed. But it is always odd when movies disappear. But like you said, it's odd the things that get focused on. It's odd the things that become like the sticking point of like, oh, we want to avoid that controversy. It's like, we want to avoid the controversy of the fact that this man playing a Native American didn't turn out to be a Native American, even though, again, I literally just saw The Searchers the other day. Guarantee you those are probably not all Native Americans. But it's this odd thing. Like you said, Kevin Spacey movies, no one's out there saying we shouldn't have them anymore. Roman Polanski still makes new movies, and people line up to work with him.
Wild.
And those movies are all still out there. But it's, for a lot of people, everybody has their line. And I'm not going to say that anything is wrong, but it is interesting that the studios themselves don't, like the line is very odd, where they're just like, you know what, we're not going to touch that anymore, but we're still going to continue to do this other thing. That's not to say that these aren't, bad no matter what, but arguably much worse things that they're just going to look past.
And it's one thing to demonize production companies that are still working with Woody Allen or Roman Polanski or Jared Leto, but as you said earlier, I don't expect the producers of Ernest Goes to Camp to do an ancestry test on casting this person, right? I mean, I don't demonize them for casting him, given the whole roots he had going for decades at that point. So I think that covers that. I've really got nothing to say about his performance. I think we've covered enough there. Andrew, there's a lot of campers in this movie. Some camp counselors. Some of these actors go on to do other notable things. I don't think we can hit these characters one by one. We'll talk about the characters more in scenes, but looking at this cast, is there some people that maybe jump out to you based on some other work they've done since this movie?
Yeah. So one of the delinquents, there's a whole group of them. One of them is a gentleman named Scott Menville. He plays Crutchfield. I think he's the one that wears like the stud bracelets, and he's the one that covers Ernest's eyes when they're driving back to the camp for the first time. Right. He goes on to voice Robin on pretty much all of the Teen Titans affiliated items in existence. And if you look at his face as an adult, he's got the exact same face he had as a kid. As you know, it tends to be. But he looks exactly the same. But like, you literally look at his filmography, and this is his first film. Doesn't do a whole lot after that, but then television, there's a lot of television credits when he's a kid, even well into being an adult. And then, in the mid 80s into the 90s, that's when he starts doing, voiceover stuff. And he starts doing Robin I think with the Teen Titans show in 2003. And he is basically in that Teen Titans Go world. He has been Robin ever since. So that's a good 20 plus years playing Robin. And a variety of great many other things. You can look around and see what he does. I'm sure there's video game stuff in here too that I haven't even touched on. But yeah, so that stands out to me. I thought it was very, very funny. I saw that because I saw the name Scott Menville, and I saw that he had like a link to his own page. I was like, why is that familiar? Like, I know the name Scott Menville. I don't know why. Yeah. And I looked and I was like, oh, that's why. One of the other ones.
Hang on. I just following Wikipedia links. His dad was an animator and writer for television, and his credits include Batman the Animated Series. How fun is that? His dad was an animator there. And I also just want to say, while we're talking about Scott Menville and Robin, if you haven't seen Teen Titans Go to the movies,
wonderful.
Watch it right now.
So wonderful.
So good. I feel like it really flew under the radar because I feel like a very specific generation watched that show, which wasn't even, I think it's people like, I didn't really watch much Teen Titans Go. I think I'm a little on the older side for that. I've gone back, seen some episodes, and I appreciate it. So I think that movie, when it finally comes out, kind of flies under the radar, but I happened to catch it, and I think there's
also a weird rift between the people who really liked the Teen Titans show before it became Teen Titans Go. Because like Teen Titans, the show is a little more
serious.
Like it's much more straightforward Teen Titans show, whereas Teen Titans Go was obviously kind of more of a sitcom-esque approach of doing the Teen Titans. And so even though I think the voice casts are literally the same, but that created some friction, and so when Teen Titans Go continued to get the focus, I think some fans of the original Teen Titans, although the end of Teen Titans Go to the movies has a tease that leads to Teen Titans versus Teen Titans Go, which is its own whole movie. So
have you seen that? Because I love Teen Titans Go, but for some reason I didn't keep watching. They made the movie and they rebooted the series, and I never watched it. But
yeah, they're fun. It's all fun.
Okay.
Teen Titans Go See Space Jam, also funny. But that's a real movie. Teen Titans Go See Space Jam.
Are you serious?
I am very serious. But
gotta watch that.
It was. I think they released it right around when the new Space Jam was coming out, but they're watching the original Space Jam. So, anyway, it's all wonderful. But yeah, so I just thought it was wild that Scott Menville was here. Another guy that stands out to me is Richard Speight Jr. plays Brooks. Now, Brooks is one of the Kiki counselors, one of the jerks, basically. And Richard Speight Jr. would go on to be a part of a little show called Supernatural, where he would play, originally, I believe it was implied he was the trickster, and then eventually was revealed as actual Loki. But was on that show for a great many years, I think, from like 2007 until late 2018. And he's not in that many episodes, but he's on it a lot. And I just thought that was wild.
15 seasons.
That show ran for a very, very, very long time. And yes, before any of you get all uppity, I know you all liked it for the first 5 seasons and then it fell off, but it's a fine show, folks. If you like the characters, you can keep watching it the whole time and you're probably going to be satisfied.
To me,
I just have a gut reaction because almost anytime you mention Supernatural, someone's like, yeah, but the first 5 seasons, it's like, I know.
To
Eric
me,
Kripke, yeah.
As someone who worked retail, high school, and for years after, it was the show that's always on in the break room because it's like CW, I think.
Yeah.
So I've seen that show in 10-minute increments, very offhand. I have nothing really to say about it beyond that.
It's actually so old. It started on the WB before it became the CW.
Oh man! Look at that.
It's been around that long. But anyway, he's just he's just one of the bratty jerk counselors, and then goes on to do that and a bunch of other stuff too. But it is wild the kind of people that get buried in some of these old movies sometimes, especially in the 80s.
And then I just want to shout out one more, and then we'll start talking about scenes of this movie. But Lyle Alzado is the muscle for the bad guys. I'm not sure. He's like I guess he's one of the construction workers, but he's one of the most prominent guys that like fights back. He's like the foreman on the people that are trying to take over this camp and demolish it. The enforcer, really big dude. Honestly, he's just most known for his time in the NFL as a defensive end. Very famously played for the Denver Broncos and the Raiders. It looks like it's credits a few other teams, but those are the two that I know offhand. But very successful career in the NFL. 2-time Pro Bowler, big deal. In fact, if you're looking at his Wikipedia page, which I happen to be on right now, like there's a very small segment that finally says acting. It's not like he has a filmography section or anything like that. But just a few appearances on different TV shows and movies. This honestly being one of the biggest ones. Sadly, he does pass away just 5 years after this. I'll say 92, after a battle with brain cancer, which is rough. He was only 43. But memorable performance as just a big, brute, buff guy. He looks scary and looks intimidating. He gets literally blown up in the movie. Seems like a good sport, but I thought that was some fun casting.
Super Bowl champion, no less. Super Bowl, what would that have been? 28? No, 18. God, you forget how wild. Yeah, you realize that it's been 40 years since then. But anyway, yeah, he's here to be the big tough enforcer dude that somebody has to fight later, and he's perfect at that. He does exactly what he needs to do.
Andrew, let's jump into this movie, talk about some of the specific scenes and things we liked and positives. And we're going to start with the high point, with the best scene in the movie, or at least our personal favorite. So, Andrew, in your opinion, when is this movie firing on all cylinders? Andrew, what is the best scene in Ernest Goes to Camp?
It's got to be, to me, it's the dispatching of Crater Industries from the camp, the kind of the fight back scene. This is where kind of I feel
80% of the budget went.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like there's always a gadget in Ernest movies. Like there's always some weird, ridiculous thing, and in this case, it's all the stuff here plus also the chef's weird fabrication machine, which just
such a weird B plot.
Chris,
oh boy,
imagine the smell.
That machine where they jump in lobster and clams and leftover fruits and vegetables and shoots it out on people. Yeah,
that's Gallard Sartain and Daniel Butler that play Jake and Eddie. They play Jake and Eddie, who are the chefs. No, I guarantee you they don't clean it out because you watch them do different foods between without doing anything. They are two relatively prominent supporting characters. They have a bunch of scenes where they're just messing around with this machine. But it reminded me, I feel like every Ernest movie has some weird machine. And then in this one, obviously, they build all their weird gadgets to fight back. But this is where like a whole lot of the weird stuff throughout the movie, like there's weird things that like get brought back. Like early in the movie, Ernest pumps up like a propane lantern too much, and then he lights it and it flies off. So they use that here. They literally put a bank of 4 lanterns on a thing and then light them and they launch them at the people. Like it's like weird little bits throughout the movie are all brought back here to kind of bring it full circle in a lot of ways. And it's just fun. This is where the delinquents and the delinquents, I feel bad calling them that. The second chancers, I'm sorry.
There you go.
The second chancers, and even
you feel
some
bad
of the
for these fictional characters calling them
delinquents? This guy would go on to voice Robin. He's clearly not a delinquent. They go on to team up with the kind of some of the jerk counselors from earlier to all save the camp, and so Ernest is in there, and even Chief St. Cloud is with them. Definitely, putting tribal face paint on them, which again, perfectly fine, not at all aged poorly, but it's just fun. This is where all the zany antics happen. You talk about Ernest being a cartoon character. This is all just straight Wile E. Coyote type stuff. Nobody's actually getting hurt except for the one guy that gets blown up. But other than that, largely everybody is just kind of running to the hills as they cause all this mayhem. And it's just Ernest doing what Ernest does. And it's a blast. Literally.
Yeah, this is so much fun.
4 out of 4 lanterns.
This is where the most scenes, like I remember, like parachuting turtles. I remember the turtles latching onto people's noses and stuff. That's what I remember. And something I didn't pick up on until moments before we hit record is that the sort of theme of this movie is the song by the Turtles.
Yes. Happy Together.
Happy Together. Yeah, I think of the name of us singing through the lyrics till I got to the title. Happy Together by the Turtles. And you have this big scene with turtles parachuting, and then the score is essentially doing the melody from Happy Together because that's something that the Ernest and the kids bonded over, singing that song together. And I think it plays the actual song at some point in the movie, I want to say.
Yeah, I think so.
But that movie is like, that song is like strung throughout the movie. It's like the one popular song they got the rights to, so they got everything they could out of it, incorporating it into the score. But I gotta wonder if that's just a coincidence or if they started using Turtles because they had the song by the Turtles. I don't really know. But that's another thing that you said, kind of comes back. That's like, is these kind of things that show some genuine effort, like in the screenplay, just setting things up and having them pay off. Ernest has a pet turtle that he's talking to at one point in the movie, and it latches onto his nose, and the only way to get him to unlatch is by singing to him. And then he uses turtles as weapons in the finale of the movie in this ridiculous scene. Andrew.
Well, then, like you said, even the food machine, they bring the food machine, like every dumb
Everything
thing
comes
throughout
up.
this movie all comes full circle. And so, you know, you can look at the quality of it all you want, but at the same time, it's pretty funny how they managed to work it all in.
Probably my favorite joke is here. It's before they literally launch the turtles in the air with a catapult. Or a big machine, a trebuchet maybe. I don't know what the trebuchet is. But you have the shot of all the turtles like in this bucket, and then you hear the turtles talk. And one of them goes, "I'm scared, Sarge." He goes, "We're all scared, son." And then it launches them. Andrew, I laughed so hard because I wasn't expecting turtles to talk, and then they make this like war reference. It reminds me of like the super serious war dialogue and Small Soldiers between the toys, but it's hilarious because they're toys. Same thing here. It's hilarious because they're turtles going to battle. I think there's some shots of like real turtles on parachutes. I was trying to like they're
definitely
when they're latched on, they're definitely like a fake turtle. But there's shots of real turtles parachuting, which like Peter probably wasn't happy. But yeah, the turtles talking, hilarious. All these explosions, like there's literally just shots of the camp. The construction workers camp of stuff just exploding. There's not always an explanation for what's being shot out there. They just like had, again, clearly dumping the budget here. My favorite explosion is, again, something set up earlier in the movie. Ernest has to plunge a filthy toilet, right? And so now here in the finale, he brings a toilet. He opens the seat, looks at what's inside, gives his catchphrase of "ew," jiggles his jaw, and they launch a dirty toilet. And I'm expecting something gross when it shows them, the toilet landing on somebody. I'm thinking someone's going to get covered in what is in real life chocolate pudding or whatever. But no, the toilet lands and it explodes like it's the biggest bomb that they shot, which is just another very fun gag. Yeah, I don't know how you don't go this scene. There's plenty of fun Ernest gags throughout, but like this is where all the payoffs are. It is it's a good time. So I'm agreeing with you as far as this being the best scene of the film.
Yeah, it's just a blast. Literally. Even the toilet, like earlier in the movie, there's a toilet that like violently ejects a water stream and launches Ernest out. So even that sort of kind of brought back in this finale. But it's just a blast. It's when the movie is on. Everything that it's been building towards, like you said, is coming to this moment, and it's fun. It's hard to not just watch this and have a blast.
Andrew, #PP. Get this out of the way real quick here. What I find to age much more poorly than the casting of Iron Eyes Cody, which, as we said, I don't really put that on the producers of this film or anything.
Sure.
Is the fact that this movie opens with a scene that takes place many lifetimes ago. And it's showing this Native American tribe and their coming of age ritual. And it's all just stuff completely fabricated and made up for this movie. And this movie conflates the spirituality of Native Americans with genuine supernatural abilities. And then it provides those abilities to the white main character of the movie in the finale. That stuff does not age well. Using Native Americans just as a convenient plot contrivance to your film and everything I just said, not great. Now, I'm not saying that should be a reason not to produce a Blu-ray of this movie.
Right.
It's fine. We can watch the movie, but we can also recognize some of the pitfalls that it finds itself in. That's how this movie opens, which I thought was wild. But then we jump to like present day, and when Ernest Saves Christmas, they do the classic Ernest gag from the commercials, which is where he talks directly to camera, who is represented by someone named Vern, and he talks to Vern. They don't do that here. He doesn't ever say, "You know what I mean, Vern," or this gag, Ernest Saves Christmas has this whole gag at a house where he's like destroying Vern's house or whatever. But we do have Ernest address the camera directly at like the beginning and end of this movie. He doesn't do it throughout. He doesn't do it when other people are around. They don't explain it much, but I just feel like audiences expected the character of Ernest to look at the camera and say some stuff. And it kind of works. I don't know. Like, I don't think anything of it that he talks to the camera in the beginning of this movie, sort of setting things up, you know? You know what I mean, Andrew?
Yeah, know what I mean, Chris? Yeah, it's interesting. This is probably like the one where he doesn't. Like, you know, it's well, because in Christmas he like specifically goes to Vern's house. So
Right.
like the idea is he's talking to Vern. So here he never really addresses Vern because I guess the idea is Vern's not here. I don't remember if in Scared Stupid he ever does it or not.
We'll have to find out when we eventually cover
one
it.
way, one day. But other than that, yeah, it's he does address the camera a lot, but it's just not talking to Vern. I guess he's talking to me. Oh no. I don't know what to say to Ernest.
One of my favorite lines is Ernest is talking about how tough he is, because the nurse wants to give him a shot and he's freaking out. He's like, "Okay, I can do this," and he describes himself as a man who's never tasted quiche. It's like proving how masculine he is, which I think is a hilarious line, Andrew. Because of how ridiculous it is. I think I might be a man who's never tasted quiche. I don't know if I've ever had a quiche before. Andrew, have you?
I'm certain I have with the amount of weddings I've attended. There's always many quiches of those.
It doesn't make you less of a man, Andrew. It's okay.
I know, because I'm secure in my masculinity and it's not based off of stupid, subjective nonsense.
I agree, but I still think it's funny when Ernest says it. One of my favorite scenes is when he takes the... we're not calling them delinquents, Andrew. What are we calling them? Second chancers.
Yes.
He takes him out into the wilderness to show him his skills, and he has this offhand remark about being lost for weeks in Nam, which suddenly gives Ernest this backstory that I didn't ever think I needed. Yeah. That Ernest served in Vietnam, but there's an entire fight scene with a badger, and we never see the badger. He just looks down off camera. He's like, "Oh, there's a badger," and he's like, "You got to be real calm." And he's talking a big game, like he knows how to handle badgers. Then all of a sudden, you hear badger noises and Ernest screaming and like throwing his body around, but we never see the badger. They got a whole fight scene and didn't have to pay for an animal or animatronic or however you would pay that off, which is just. I love seeing the $3.5 million budget in that way. I think it's pretty fun. And also he has a great gag that I certainly did not appreciate or understand when I was a kid. He's talking about how to sharpen a knife. He grabs a rock and he says, "First you wet the stone," and he licks the rock before he rubs the knife on it. Of course, the joke here being is you use a whetstone to sharpen a knife, which is not a whetstone. It's just the name of it. But I thought, upon rewatch, as an adult who understands that joke, thought it was pretty good. Thought it was pretty funny.
Yep.
The golf cart is also a wonderful recurring gag.
Just gag.
It gets away
driving
from
itself
him.
Around the cart. Yeah.
He doesn't put it in park when he walks into the bathroom to plunge the toilet, and the golf cart takes off. And just throughout the movie, a golf cart drives by. It made me laugh every time.
And then ultimately has a relatively important part to play in our finale.
And it pays off.
It does.
Solid script writing here. Study this in film school. Parts of it.
Yeah. Ignore that first scene.
Yeah.
And just pick up there.
Just looking through my notes, and most of them are just small notes about Ernest and fun gags. There's one, before we hit record, I had to ask you to remind me why I had this in my notes, because my note just says, "Where is the red chaise lounge?" And I'm like, why did I write that down? When did that happen? And you reminded me, Andrew, that it's whenever Ernest is talking to Nurse St. Cloud, who is of Native American descent in this movie, he uses, I guess, Native American Sign Language. They never really explain it, but he uses sign language, which I guess is a Native American
Plains Indian Sign Language. It is apparently it was a Plains Nation version of sign language.
And he says, he's signing and he says, "Where's the red chaise lounge?" Like, he learned how to sign in a Native American sign language. Where is the red? Is that the joke? He learned this ridiculous phrase. Like, normally the joke would be like, he says, "Where is the bathroom?" And then subtitles are translating his sign language, and he says, "Where's the red?" The joke is that he gets the sign language wrong,
Right.
But here the joke seems to be he's actually signing and saying, "Where's the Red Chase Lounge?" in Native American Sign Language, which is that's funny.
It's wild. It's a very strange joke, but it is pretty funny. It turns out Jim Varney can just make weird stuff work.
There's this, the emotional part of the movie is like Ernest bonding with these second chancers, and then ultimately bringing the whole campground together against the bad guys.
Yeah,
I feel like #PP. There's like a scene missing where he like rallies everybody, because suddenly in the final fight you have like the snotty camp regulars helping out, you have the chef guys helping out, but there's never that scene of him addressing everyone being like, we gotta work together. But they do. I mean, ultimately the point gets across because they all work together. But I love this gag where the camp regulars, the snobby kids, they help by setting up this big amplifier for their record player, and they play, literally the vinyl says in big letters, sound effects, a 12-inch vinyl record of sound effects, and it's just like animal sounds and fart noises, and they play that just to, I don't know, disorient and confuse the construction workers.
It was wild. Yeah.
But my note is just, I want that vinyl. I want a vinyl that just says sound effects, and it's
I'm
just
gonna get you.
an hour of sound
I'm gonna
effects.
get you a vinyl that just has a white label on it that says sound effects, and you're gonna be like, Andrew, this is just Light My Fire by the Doors, and I'd be like, yes, and that has sounds in it. I do love that gag because they keep moving the needle around, so like they know where the exact sound effects are.
It matters what random sound effects they play. Like,
right, like
they can't just let it play.
Just wild. That was really pretty funny. That whole sequence. We do have a moment where Ernest becomes, I guess, what's the way to put it? Basically, Ernest faces down the big enemy crater gentleman and is able to, I guess, channel the Kikiki ancient ritual that we see at the beginning of the film, and all of the bullets that are shot at him point blank miss. And that it's a little weird, but then ultimately the guy just like leaves. Like he's so confounded by what happened.
He just saw. Yeah.
So he leaves, and then we find out through dialogue later that he was arrested for fraud. I just thought that was a very weird, like, abrupt ending to that character. Just like you said, I don't know if there's maybe a couple of scenes that didn't get shot or were missing, but like I just remember like it's like I like he misses all the shots, and I was like, oh man, now what? And then it's like they don't apprehend him, they don't do anything, he just leaves. And then I was like, okay. And then later they were like, yeah, he got arrested for fraud, and I was like, well, that was convenient.
Poochie died on his way to his home planet.
Exactly.
Yeah, the end of this movie does crack me up because, like I said, Nurse St. Cloud, when she sees that they're all getting ready to fight, she's like, this is crazy, you gotta go to the authorities. And she leaves. She leaves the campground, leaves the movie, shows back up at the end, and like, I think this is literally the last scene, like freeze frame. She shows up with cops, and she goes, we got it! The judge issued a restraining order. And then it's like, yay, freeze. And like, that's the big happy ending. We got the restraining order, which again, as an 8-year-old watching this, I don't even know if I knew what that really meant, but that's like the big climax. And Andrew, there's one more joke in this movie. There's a mid-credit scene, which I thought was very funny. We have our two chef characters. One of them is the skinny guy, and Eddie we talked about. What's the larger gentleman that's in like all the Ernest movies? He's in Ernest Saves Christmas.
Gaylord Sartain. Gaylord Sartain.
Oh, I see. Yeah, as
Jake.
Jake.
He's Jake.
Okay.
Jake's the other one, yeah.
And I want to say, I know I talked about this in Ernest Saves Christmas. It does the gag where he like wiggles his eyes back and forth, and there's a sound effect like da 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 da. And I remember watching that movie and being like, as a kid, I thought that was really fun and impressive, and I would try to do it. And then rewatching Ernest Saves Christmas, I was like, oh, well, they're just speeding up the footage. He does it a few times here. I don't think they're speeding up the footage. I think this guy can wiggle his eyes really fast back and forth. I think it's really fast. I don't know. I can wiggle my eyes back and forth. Andrew, look at me. Is it as fast as him?
It's not fast. I'll tell you that.
I don't know.
I don't know that it's as fast as him. It's not bad though.
So I don't know if he has a special talent or something everybody can do, but that's just his like signature thing. He does it a few times here. But what I want to get to is, I mean, first of all, this whole side story with him trying to concoct the perfect meal with ridiculous ingredients, and he invents this big machine. It's the part of this movie. And it's still a movie aimed for kids. This is the most, this is only here for the 10-year-olds type thing, #PP. But these two wacky characters they're in the mid-credit scene where he finally makes this perfect dish. And Eddie, who's like his dim-witted sidekick, eats the food really fast. Like he bends down out of frame, eats the food, stands back up and is now wearing a tuxedo and is like a lounge singer, and he sings this song and walks off screen. The food is so good it transforms Eddie into like high class.
It doesn't even make sense.
It makes no sense. And then Jake starts eating the food and nothing happens to him. But I thought it was pretty funny. I thought it was a pretty fun way to end the movie.
No, it's very funny. It's just one of those scenes where you're just genuinely kind of like, what is the joke here?
Like, this joke, we couldn't work it into the movie, but we shot it and it was too good not to use. So it's going to be a mid-credit scene. Here you go.
Yeah, I truly, honestly have no idea.
Andrew, I had a good time revisiting this movie. I'm not saying credit to the time, got it wrong, or anything like that. To me, when I revisit a movie from my childhood, I now have two categories. I have Ninja Turtles or Power Rangers. Ninja Turtles being the 1990 film, Power Rangers being the first Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, the movie. And I revisit a movie from childhood, and either it's Ninja Turtles, where it's like, genuinely great movie. This is a great movie I watched as a kid. I still go back. I'm like, wow, this movie has merit. It's a great film. I still love it. I can watch it for genuine appreciation to this day. And then Power Rangers is a movie I watch as an adult, and I was like, okay, I get why I like this as a kid. It's aimed for kids. It's fun. It's not bad or offensive. It didn't age poorly, but like it's aimed for kids. And I can still watch it now and enjoy it, probably because I watched it as a kid. I feel like if I had watched Ernest Goes to Camp for the first time as an adult and had never seen this character before at all, I don't know. I might feel differently about it. But certainly, it's aimed for kids. I get it why I liked it as a kid. I still enjoy it, but it's that kind of nostalgia. It's just the two flavors of nostalgia I look at. Again, I call it the Ninja Turtles or the Power Rangers. This falls into the Power Rangers camp, which isn't a bad thing. I had a good time with this.
Yeah, I think this is, in the realm of summer camp movies, I think this one's perfectly watchable. Sounds like backhanded, but it's fun. There's a lot of classic, summer camp type movie hijinks. You've got your campers versus the outsiders kind of narrative that weaves throughout it. You've got your evil guy who wants to get rid of the camp behind it. Like a lot of these are very classic kind of summer camp movie tropes, or, movies you saw in like, a plot you'd see on like a movie you watched on the Disney Channel as a kid. Like just a very similar vibe. And so there's a comfort to what's happening here. And then obviously when you center it with a performance from Jim Varney as Ernest, it's hard not to look at that and enjoy. Like, it's not something that's gonna, like I said, it's not TMNT 90, but there's a lot of enjoyment to be had watching it.
All right, Andrew, that's 2 summer camp movies down, and in the grand canon of Best of the Rest, 2 Ernest films down. Now, we talked about it a lot this episode already, but Ernest Scared Stupid, it's got to happen at some point. I don't know what theme that's going to fall under. Maybe it'll be one of our Octobers. Maybe we'll find another way to do it. I'm excited to watch that. I'm excited to cover that. Will we dive into straight-to-video Ernest movies? No, probably not. I think Scared Stupid will be the last time we cover Ernest, but we'll get there. I'm excited to talk about it, but I'm glad, honestly, #PP, that we didn't decide to do an Ernest month. A month of Ernest movies would be a lot. Yeah, and plus, you just give the Mark Strong Award to the same person all month. It's fun. You got to throw some variety in there, but man, that's 2 episodes now. Though we've talked about Ernest movies and liked them, but said on podcasts like, well, clearly Ernest Scared Stupid's like the best one. That's like the best. I'm curious if we're gonna still have that opinion when we get to it, but that is later. That's down the road. I don't know when that's gonna be. We'll cover it eventually, but for now. Right now, Andrew, it's time for the question of the week. And if you want to leave us a question for a future episode, you can do just that. All you have to do is join our Discord. There's a link in the show notes. What are you waiting for? It's free. Come and join us. Come and talk about fun, nerdy stuff with us. And leave us questions like that guy in Doom has done. Here's what they ask, Andrew. Who would win in a fight? Would is italicized there. All of DC or all of Marvel? That simple. All of the DC characters versus all of the Marvel characters. Now, to me, this is tough because you start with like your ground level guys, your main guys. You've got your Avengers, you've got your Justice League, but like you very quickly spiral into like galactic and cosmic characters, Galactus and Doomsday and like how do those guys even fight? Like who's got the biggest world ender? Is it just a fight between those two? I mean, how do you ultimately settle this? I don't know. I'm struggling to definitively say one versus the other. My gut says Marvel has done more cosmic world-ending type characters, so maybe Marvel, but maybe I'm overthinking this. Andrew, what's coming to mind for you?
Whoever has Superman wins this.
Interesting,
because
which would be DC, of course.
Which would be DC. So there's a lot of questions you can ask. Though, if you take it as just the superheroes versus the superheroes, I don't think there's any question the DC superheroes are going to beat the Marvel superheroes because no one at Marvel is as powerful as Superman is.
Yeah, and even people in the Marvel universe have never heard of Kryptonite.
They haven't. And also, whatever. But even if you start looking at characters at Marvel, like, say, the Sentry, or even Miracle Man, characters that are Superman adjacent, I don't think they have the stones to beat Superman, because Superman is just... There's a caveat to Superman that is actually explained in an interesting video. It was one of those like superhero beatdown videos they did where they'd like try to analyze 2 characters to determine who would win. And they did a video that was about Goku versus Superman. And there is no world where the result of that video wasn't going to make people mad, because the conclusion they reached is that Superman would beat Goku. Because one of Goku's biggest caveats as a character is that he has these limits he has to overcome to move himself to the next level. Superman doesn't. So when there is a character who has limits he has to overcome versus a character who has none, the character who has no limits is going to get the edge in that fight. And obviously they would be like, what, the weights, all of this, and they added it to a much more simpler point. Superman is as powerful as he needs to be. And you may say that that's cheap storytelling, but let me tell you something. Every single superhero is written exactly the same way, largely. Their powers shift and mold and change depending on whatever the story needs them to do. Largely, those stories try to be written within the existing confines, but it is not uncommon for those stories to be written in ways that force them to go to different levels. Like the Flash used to really just run fast. Now he can run so fast he can shift between dimensions. He can run back in time. He can run forward in time. Like
what starts,
what starts as running faster than other people turns into multiversal travel. And that's how it works. And you could even look at a character like the Flash. The Flash can move faster than people can think. How do you beat that? If, like, you think about like a Doctor Strange or a Scarlet Witch, it's like, cool. They are still dependent on their brain firing the correct neurons in order for them to do certain things. If there is somebody who is moving faster than they can think, what do you do about that? How do you combat that? And largely, this is just kind of a nonsense question, because you could come up with similar arguments for everything. But for me, the key, as always, will always be Superman. Because any fight between all of DC and all of Marvel, like, it's going to come down to, is it going to be the Beyonder versus Superman? Is it going to be Immortus versus Superman? It's going to come down to somebody, one of those great cosmic beings, versus Superman. And in that fight, Superman will always win because he has to. He's Superman. It's what he does. 90% of DC events are stall until Superman gets here.
One of my favorite comic runs, superhero comic runs, is the Flash run during the Brightest Day reboot.
Yeah.
Art is gorgeous, and it's probably the run that made me fall in love with the Flash.
That's Francis Manapul, I think, on the art, and was co-writing with Brian Buccellato. I don't know how you say his name. But yeah.
Sounds correct, Andrew. But there's one scene that really stands out to me. You're just talking about the Flash moving faster than people think, where someone throws a car at somebody, like an innocent bystander, and the Flash disassembles the car in midair. He takes the entire car apart into pieces so that it misses this person, which is just fun and clever. But yeah, he can move so fast, he can take apart a car piece by piece. Like, that's incomprehensible how fast his brain is working. You know, you think about his body, but his brain is able to do that in the fraction of a second. That's a good point that I don't think a lot of people think about, but it's
there are a lot of DC and that's always kind of been the caveat that people say about the DC superheroes is they are overpowered. Because, you know, you get somebody like the Flash. It's like, okay, how is Captain Cold a threat to the Flash if the Flash can do things like that? And that's what I mean when you say the story kind of dictates the powers. You know, there's going to be a story where maybe the Flash is distracted that way, and it's just long enough that Captain Cold's able to freeze his feet. And, you know, it's like, oh, well, why doesn't he vibrate his feet out? And it's like, it's just long enough. You know, if the Flash can move that fast all the time, how has he not just stopped all of his criminals ever by moving so fast he just throws them all in jail? Like, at that point, that's when you're just like, oh, why hasn't Batman killed the Joker? It's like, because you don't understand what serial storytelling is. You can't have another Joker story if the Joker is dead. And that's the kind of the problem when you try to apply, like, real-world logic to fictional universes. It's always been, like, people are like, oh, well, Gotham would be safer if Batman killed his villains. It's like, yeah, but then there's no more Batman stories. And people may be like, what's wrong with that? And I'm like, because they make money. Like, come on. Like, it's not hard. Like, it's very base level, simple stuff. Like, why doesn't Batman kill the Joker? Because the Joker is popular. And people like seeing Batman fight the Joker. That's it. But like, when you do... Yeah, it's a tough...
It's hard not to go off on so many tangents here, but I'm of the mind... I'm now on the team that in The Killing Joke, Batman kills the Joker in the end.
Yep.
But that book was so popular, they folded it into Batman canon, so you can't have that ending. But I think there's very deliberate allusions for you to read it that way, and I think it's a more interesting way to read it. But
basically, Joker went too far this time, and Batman, and you know, arguably, people be like, oh, well, why is this more? And it's Joker made it personal. He made it personal, and once Joker made it personal, Batman was like, all right, this is it. I like that reading of it. That's how Grant Morrison has always said that it is. I know Grant Morrison is his own kind of polarizing figure, but just because of what he writes, not for any other reason. Grant Morrison's like that one person where, like, it's a completely normal, upstanding dude, but he writes things and people are like, what? And not even like in a Jeff Loeb, like it's the quality is downhill. They just usually don't understand after they've read Grant Morrison stuff. But I really like that reading of The Killing Joke. And it reads with how Alan Moore approached it, which was this wasn't supposed to be a Batman. This wasn't supposed to be just another Batman story. This wasn't supposed to be folded in. But back to the point.
DC versus Marvel. I think you've maybe sold me that whoever has Superman's going to win. And you could probably make valid arguments for either team.
Sure.
Probably. But there's this, I guess it's a website called What Beats Rock. And it's the best use of AI I've ever seen, because it's just for a fun, silly game and not meant to be a useful tool, which is a horrible application of AI because it's extremely not reliable and it's plagiaristic.
It's
and
dumb.
We are going way too fast with incorporating it to everything. But get off that soapbox. What Beats Rock is very fun. It's very simple. It asks you a question. It says, what beats rock? And of course, you can pen and paper. And it's like, yes. And it tells you, however many million other people have also guessed that. What beats paper? And you can put in anything. You can put in fictional characters. You can put in anything in your mind. You can make a scenario where it beats the last thing. And you keep going down this rabbit hole. And it uses AI to determine who wins that matchup. and you get like a trophy for the first person to ever come up with that item beating the other item. You can get real like existential with it, and like certain ideas can beat things. It's really fun. But what I'm getting at is, at one point I had used Superman for an answer and said, okay, what beats Superman? And I said Batman, because Batman's beaten Superman in plenty of stories if the story calls for it. But the AI determined no. It's like, no, Superman's an all-powerful being, Batman's a guy in a suit. Sorry, he doesn't win. This many other people have also tried that answer, which I had to be like, okay, that's fair. I mean, we all know in a real fight, no one's beating Superman. I got to say, Andrew, this very podcast, Best of the Rest, has made me have a deeper appreciation of Superman. For one, I'm talking with you every week, and you love Superman, and that's infectious. Two, we've covered a lot of Superman movies, specifically Superman 3 and 4, which I genuinely like. And I think there's a lot of merit to them, and I think they nail the character of Superman. I've come to this great appreciation, and I was able to put a fine point on it in one of our past episodes, but I'll repeat it here. Yes, Superman is an all-powerful character, and people often say that's what makes him boring, or that's cheap, or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, Superman isn't Superman because of what he can do. Superman is Superman because of what he chooses to do. That's what makes the character great. That's what makes him interesting. He's an all-powerful being, but he takes the time to save the one civilian, to set a good example, to not use his power for evil, like to be a guiding light, to be an example of what's right, like a moral compass. Like he's, power corrupts, but absolute power corrupts absolutely. He is the exception to that rule. He's defiant of that. He's proving that we can all be better. And that's
Superman. Go ahead.
Wonderful.
Finish, please.
That's it. That's my fine point on Superman.
Superman has this moral code that is very simple, and it's do the right thing because it's the right thing, and everybody matters. That's the other kind of core tenet of Superman is everybody matters. The bad guys matter, the good guys matter, the one person matters. It's a really great Superman story I like by Tom King called Up in the Sky, where one girl has been kidnapped and transported across the universe. And Superman says, I can't let it go. He can't let this one person go. And everyone's like, but we have no idea where this girl is. You can't do that. And he said, yeah, I can. And he spends a very long time trying to find this girl. It's basically Superman on this kind of missing person hunt through the universe, where he falls through time holes and he ends up on other planets and he goes to all these deep lengths. And he succeeds. He finds her. And she's still there, and he brings her back. And on their way back, she asks him, and she's like, can you save everybody? And he's like, no, but I'm going to try. And that's Superman. And then on the flip side of that, the DC just did an event called Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths, which I didn't read because I just didn't. I kind of don't read a lot of event stuff, but I'd heard decent things about it, and I was kind of flipping through it because the central caveat of Dark Crisis on Infinite Earths is the Justice League go missing, and everybody else has to step up and try to survive this onslaught by basically everybody. And so it's in the final issue, and this kind of ties into my earlier joke too, but it's John Kent, who's Superman's son, that got aged up, and so now he also functions as essentially Superman, but he's not as powerful as his dad is, because his dad has been doing this for a really long time. He's been exposed to that yellow sun for a lot longer. He's just not quite as powerful as his dad. And all John is trying to do is buy everybody time to get away, because you've got Doomsday here, you've got Darkseid here, you've got everybody here. Havoc is everywhere. This is when Black Adam was kind of doing his superhero thing, because the movie was coming out. Black Adam is there, and he can't quite help. And so John succeeds in buying everybody time, but has like battered himself in the process. And he's like on his knees, he's in a slump, and Doomsday is coming straight at him. And John just basically says, he's like, but I did it. Everybody had enough time. And he basically accepts that Doomsday is about to slice right through him. And right as Doomsday is about to slice right through him, Superman shows up, and it's this really awesome shot where like John is about to like die basically. And as Doomsday is about to finish the killing blow, Superman flies in, and it's this shot of like Superman's fist hitting Doomsday's fist, and it just looks awesome. And it's that it doesn't matter how steep the odds are, Superman is going to show up and give it everything that he has. And I don't know. It always bugs me when people say that Superman is boring. Because to me, like, if you like Chris Evans as Captain America, you like Superman. Because that's all Superman is. Chris Evans' Captain America is probably the second best Superman portrayal we've ever gotten. But it's this nobleness of the character, and like you said, it's not about what he could do. It's about what he chooses to do. Superman could reshape the world literally to be his face, and he doesn't, because why would you do that? Lex Luthor.
There's all powerful characters. We see like Ultron, Thanos type characters that are like, but I'm doing this for the good of all. I'm sacrificing a small group to save a larger group, and they think it's noble. Superman has that ability, but his brain won't allow him to think that way.
But also, like an Ultron thing is literally like humans are destroying the planet, so humans have to go. And Superman's response is simply, why not both? Like, both can survive. It can be done. Like it doesn't have to be this one way or the other. It's not ultimate it's not get rid of humans or it's ultimate destruction. And it exposes kind of the binary nature of those characters. When people like Thanos will say, well, I'm going to wipe out half the universe because that way the balance is correct. It's not going to fix the problem. Superman's goal is not to solve the symptoms, it's to fix the problem. And it's a key difference between the way that character operates and a lot of others. And I don't know. When I think about Superman, I think of a guy who will always do the right thing, no matter the odds, no matter how it makes him look. And there's been a lot of Superman stories lately written by a guy named Mark Waid, who's gotten to come back to DC and do a lot of really good Superman stuff. And I think he's one of the best writers that encapsulates that. So anyway, all of that is to say, Superman will be the thing that stands between all of Marvel defeating all of DC. And when you're standing between Superman and victory, you will not reach victory.
I'm sold. I'm also picking DC in this case because of the Superman argument. But if you feel differently, we want to hear your side too. Let us know. Hop into that Discord server, join the conversation, answer the question. It's just a lot of fun in there. If you're listening to my voice now, why haven't you joined us? It's free. Jump in there. And come back next week as Summer Camp Month continues. We'll be talking about the classic 90s film, Heavyweights. And I can't wait to jump into it. Until then, just remember that maybe not every movie is great,
but all movies have greatness.
Thank you to Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. You can find him on Instagram at NotThatMarkAnthony, and thanks to Mitch for the music. Check him out on Twitter at I'm a Biggie Boy, and check our show notes for the SoundCloud link. Check out our store on TeePublic for some Best of the Rest merch, and if you enjoyed this episode, please share it with a friend. That is the only way that we grow. And follow us on social media at BOTRcast. Thank you.